Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, Brazil, closure of companies. Pandemia. 20,000 SMEs closed their doors, 100,000 jobs were lost and the number of companies fell back to 2008 levels. A private study supports the concept coined by Fabián, Sarito, quintiero. There was a sharp drop in the number of registered companies, which thus went back 13 years. What were the hardest hit sectors? According to Colatina, in 2024% of Argentine companies had to close, and thus the number of active companies returned to the level it had in 2008. According to the Colatina report, among the companies that had to close their doors, the most affected segment is service providers. 95% of the firms that closed belonged to this category, representing a 5% drop. With the global data for 2020, the total number of companies fell by 4.2% and returned to 2008 levels. Parque de la Costa on the brink of closure. The owners assured that the operation is unfeasible. It has 500 employees. Last week, a first meeting was held at the Ministry of Labor of the province, where union representatives and company authorities participated. Without operating for 8 months, the Parque de la Costa, the largest amusement park in the country, could close its doors permanently. From the company Sociedad Comercial del Plata, which has the concession for the property located in Tigra, they confirmed that they are willing to carry out an eventual transfer of management, since in the current situation, the operation is unfeasible. The park has been closed since the start of the quarantine and a great effort has been made to pay salaries, despite not having any income and having to accumulate growing expenses and losses that today are impossible to face. Due to the economic crisis, high taxes and labor regulations, almost 50 auto parts companies have closed in the last decade. A report from the Association of Argentine Component Factories, AFAC, indicated that the decisions made this year exceed the pandemic. The factors that affect the development of the activity, the lack of stimuli and the legal insecurity produced by the permanent change in the rules of the game discourage investment projects that are required to maintain a structurally sound and sustainable automotive industry. There are plenty of examples of frequent and untimely regulatory changes in labor, tax and financial matters, as well as the lack of a justice that acts quickly, effectively and without interference, the entities specified. With zero billing and far from working again, they warn of a massive closure of Buenos Aires hotels in the coming months. The best-known case was that of the Hotel Castelar, on Avenida de Mayo. But in the sector they assure that several more are negotiating their withdrawal. The hotel sector is one of the hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic, with zero billing since the end of March, when the quarantine began, and little prospect of resuming activity levels this year. This situation jeopardizes the continuity of hotel ventures of all sizes, but especially independent ones, which are not part of a chain, and those who have to rent the building where they operate. It stopped producing and is for sale Verbano, the only company in the country that manufactured porcelain. It is located in Capitán Bermúdez, in the province of Santa Fe. Its 120 employees are only receiving half of their salary for the ATP program. It had already been very complicated for some years, with falls in sales and an increase in imports, and now the crisis due to the pandemic has added. Since the beginning of the quarantine, the tableware and ceramics company Verbano, the main porcelain manufacturer in the country, stopped producing and this week announced to its 120 employees that it is for sale. After 80 years, the traditional Danica company closed its plant in Lavallejo. About 150 people work in the margarine producing firm. The measure was ordered after a mandatory conciliation was not complied with. The traditional Danica brand, with some 80 years of history, which this week closed its plant in Lavallejo, in the suburbs of Buenos Aires, after a trade union conflict. Some 150 people worked on that property, where it was founded at the end of the 1930s, and vegetable-based margarines were produced. The Luque supermarket chain closed its 20 branches and laid off 1,200 employees. The company had stores distributed in the provinces of Tucumán, Santiago del Estero, Catamarca and Salta. After several months of conflict, the Luque supermarket chain closed its branches and laid off its 1,200 employees. The firm belongs to the Tucumán businessman Emilio Luque and had about 20 stores distributed in the provinces of Tucumán, Santiago del Estero, Catamarca and Salta. The factory of the classic Bombucha water bombs closed. The decision was communicated by the company's shareholders to its 65 workers. They also made condoms under the Exotic brand. The company that made Bombucha balloons, a classic every summer for several decades, will finally close after 66 years of activity. This is the company Seidel, industrial company of latex articles, which has its production plant in the province of San Luis, and which, in addition to water bottles, manufactured other products such as condoms with the Exotic brand and party balloons. Despite the reactivation, more than 7,000 employer companies closed their doors in 2021. Argentina is on its way to closing 2021 with just over 500,000 employer companies, after having dramatically lost companies in 2020 due to the impact of the pandemic and not having stopped that process even in 2021, despite the reactivation process. The phenomenon of destruction of companies began in 2015 and worsened with the pandemic and the process of social isolation. The decline in blinds continues this year despite the recovery that will give Argentina GDP growth that the government estimates at 10%. The Argentine Confederation of Medium Enterprises, CAME, estimated that, due to the pandemic, a total of 90,700 empty premises were registered, with the closure of 41,200 SMEs, which involves 185,300 jobs, throughout the country, with which there is an average of 9 empty commercial premises per block. Falabella closes its last 3 stores and says goodbye to Argentina. The Chilean group will close its stores in Florida, Rosario and Unicenter and have opened a voluntary retirement for its 500 employees. Given the lack of buyers, the Chilean group Falabella announced that it will close the last 3 physical stores it had and finally begins to say goodbye to Argentina. In a brief statement, the Chilean Capital Group revealed that, in the context of the plan that Falabella is carrying out to make its operation in Argentina sustainable, the company will close the department stores located in Rosario, the Unicenter shopping mall and the pedestrian street Florida in the city of Buenos Aires. Cencosud announces store closures as a cost reduction measure. Among the news released by the South American retail giant, during its annual Cencosud Day, was a plan to close up to 120 of its stores globally. This action will be part of a broader plan to reduce its operating costs as a percentage of its sales, in which the company has already reduced the number of staff in several of its stores, among other things. Even though this measure has an expense, in the short term, of around $65 million, the economic benefits will soon be seen. It is estimated that the savings will reach the sum of $200 million after 1 year of management. The company operates with stores in Chile, Brazil, Peru, Colombia and Argentina in areas such as supermarkets, hypermarkets, department stores and home goods stores. Its chains include Jumbo, Paris, Easy, Bretas, Wong and Vea, among others. In Chile it also operates shopping centers and offers financial services. Chile, where Cencosud is headquartered, is its most important market, constituting 38% of its sales, followed by Argentina, 24%, Brazil, 20%, Colombia, 10%, and Peru, 8%. 500,000 CDMX businesses are at risk of lowering their curtains. More than 1 million businesses closed permanently due to the stoppage of activities, and it is estimated that 500,000 more are at risk of lowering their curtains. During this year, just over 1 million small businesses and family businesses had to close their establishments, and the risk that during the first half of this year another 300,000 businesses will join the closure of activities is latent, declared the National Council for the Development of Small Trade, through a statement. Nearly 1.6 million businesses closed in Mexico due to the pandemic, INEGI. The INEGI reported that from October 2020 to July 2021, close to 1.6 million businesses closed due to the COVID-19 health emergency. An estimated 1.6 million Mexican businesses closed permanently between October 2020 and July 2021 in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, reported the National Institute of Statistics and Geography, INEGI. 5 large companies that went bankrupt in Mexico due to the pandemic. After the COVID-19 pandemic arrived in Mexico in March 2020, many companies closed their doors permanently or had to adapt to bankruptcy protection schemes to continue their operations. In several cases there was even the closure of companies that had been in existence for centuries. Here is a list of the largest companies that had to close in Mexico, plus those that accumulate throughout 2021. 1. Best Buy. During 2020, Best Buy had sales of $40 million in Mexico, and although this may seem like a lot, it is nothing if we compare it with the $346 million that Amazon generated in Mexico in the same period, without the need to have a single store. Physical. Amazon, which does not have physical stores, sold 850% more electronics through e-commerce. The conclusion is that technology users went to Best Buy only to see the products in a physical way, but because of the high costs they did not buy them there. Due to the above, Best Buy announced its departure from Mexico, with which it closed its 41 stores in the country since December 31, 2020. 2. Aeromexico. Aeromexico is in technical bankruptcy as a result of the historic reduction in sales as a result of the coronavirus pandemic and due to the lack of agreements to access the entirety of a $1 billion loan to help it continue its operations. Many governments around the world have done a good job financially supporting aviation jobs, but that hasn't happened in Mexico or Latin America in general, where airlines continue to blow cash, and this is expected to continue into next year. Without financial help, many airlines will not survive in 2021. 3. Sin Delantal. Due to the coronavirus pandemic and the growing competition that exists around food delivery, Sin Delantal, a pioneering service company in Mexico, decided to leave the country. The company mentioned that the reason why they will stop providing their services in the country is due to the growing competition that exists in this area. Uber Eats, Didi Food, Rappi, among others, which have gained greater relevance and are supported by more strong, so their opportunities were very limited. 4. Cinemex. Cinemex, the second largest movie theater chain in Mexico, has closed more than 140 theaters indefinitely and is working with banks to restructure at least $230 million in debt. After the COVID-19 pandemic, Cinemex injected cash into its business to continue operating and kept paying interest even as new Hollywood releases sold out. Theaters reopened with limited capacity in August 2020, but the chain was unable to reap the profits from blockbusters. Coupled with months later many states across the country returned to a red light after a spike in COVID-19 cases. 5. Interjet. The Mexican airline Interjet entered technical bankruptcy, and at risk of collapse after an order to start paying nearly $30 million in back taxes. Interjet already had a debt with the Mexican government before the pandemic, and with the drop in national and international flights, the situation worsened. Interjet's net debt is currently around 11.5 times its earnings, so it is at great risk of collapsing altogether. More than 135,000 SMEs closed in Peru in the last 2 years. As of June 2022, the informality of micro and small businesses rose to 85%, higher than the pre-pandemic level of 70%, due to the absence of actions by the Pedro Castillo government, alerted the Lima Chamber of Commerce. As a result of the pandemic and without timely actions by the government of Pedro Castillo to reactivate the economy, in the last 2 years more than 135,000 micro and small companies, MSMEs, have closed their doors permanently, mostly in the commerce and services sector, leaving employment for about 540,000 Peruvians, reported the Lima Chamber of Commerce, CCL. More than 45,000 companies stopped operating in Peru as a result of COVID in 2020. The year of the pandemic brought an unusual increase in new companies in Peru, of more than 235,000 units, most of them sole proprietorships and dedicated to retail sales, a reaction to the disappearance of 2.2 million jobs due to the economic crisis. What companies got goodbye to the Peruvian market this 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic? This 2020 was a difficult year for companies due to the pandemic, also complicating the situation of millions of Peruvian workers. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, this year 2.7 million formal companies in Latin America could close. The economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic complicated the situation of millions of workers and thousands of companies in the country during this 2020. Only until August 2020, it was estimated that 2 out of 10 companies would have stopped working, according to figures from the National Institute of Statistics and Informatics, INEI. In addition, until the middle of the year, the Association of Family Businesses indicated that 30% of the total number of companies had to change their line of business in order to sustain themselves. For its part, the Peru SME Association assured that around 500,000 small and medium-sized companies will not reopen their businesses after being strongly affected by the pandemic. One of the most affected sectors was tourism. According to the National Chamber of Tourism, Canator, until August some 70,000 companies dedicated to tourism were closed, which produced a loss of about 650,000 jobs. At the regional level, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, indicates that some 2.7 million formal companies could close in Latin America as a result of the economic crisis. There are still no exact figures on the number of businesses that have had to say goodbye to the Peruvian market in the whole year, but here we present some of the best-known cases at the national level. Polystal. One of the most recent cases is that of the well-known brand Polystal. At the end of November, the Universal Textile Company approved its dissolution and liquidation. The information was made public when the company, owner of the Polystal brand, sent a letter to the Superintendency of the Stock Market, SMV, indicating the shareholders' decision. According to Gestion, in the third quarter of 2020, the company's fabric sales fell by 84.99% compared to 2019. Brujas de Cachiche. At the beginning of July, the Brujas de Cachiche restaurant declared bankruptcy after almost 29 years of operation. The shareholders' meeting of Surchurser SA, owner of the restaurant, agreed to the dissolution. The person in charge of the liquidation of the company, Francisco Baron Vélez, stated that the crisis was the trigger for a weak financial situation carried over from previous years. According to information from the National Chamber of Tourism of Peru, Canator, at least 100,000 restaurants have had to close due to the pandemic. Soyas. The transport company Soyas SA announced its liquidation in July, after 38 years in the Peruvian market. In August it was learned that with the assets that remained from Soyas, the company Peru Bus was refloated. This increased its capital stock to up to $19.9 million through a process called business spin-off. Despite announcing its dissolution, the company is still active through its Facebook page. Paris stores. At the beginning of July, the Cencosud Group announced the closure of operations of all its Paris, Peru stores. The company operated 11 stores in the country and they decided to close it because the results and participation expected to make the company sustainable had not been achieved. Avianca Peru. In May, the airline Avianca Peru SA announced the closure of its operations and the start of a dissolution and liquidation process. The company filed for bankruptcy in the United States, but the company will continue to operate on routes to and from Peru through other subsidiaries. Chromotex. In September, the transport company Chromotex announced its dissolution in the face of the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As announced in a statement, the dissolution was decided by the company's shareholder meeting, after 35 years in the Peruvian market. This company had received a loan of $6,155,869 from the Reactiva Peru program, but after the closure decision, they assured that the money would be returned. Publimeter. The Metro Internacional chain announced its departure from the Peruvian market at the end of May of this year. The economic crisis caused by COVID-19 put an end to 9 years of publications that were distributed free of charge in 100 points in Lima. Uber Eats. In June, Uber Eats, in charge of delivering food to different businesses, stopped operating in Peru due to the problems generated by the pandemic and the complications that occurred to establish protocols for the reactivation of businesses. This is a difficult decision, and our priority now is to minimize as much as possible the impact on our teams, restaurant partners, delivery partners, and users, they indicated in their statement several months ago. Possible closure of Electra. One of the last dismissals of large companies due to COVID-19 would be that of Electra. This closure has been anticipated by the Gestión newspaper and the Semana Económica portal, after the group in charge of the store chain sold 100% of Banco Azteca. Last month it was recorded that the stores in Chorrillos and Villa El Salvador are closed and the one in Villa Maria del Triunfo is auctioning off the merchandise. Until 2019, the company had 60 stores operating in Peru and a market share of 5%, but due to the pandemic, the stores had to remain closed. When the online shopping boom began, Electra was unable to compete against other companies in its field. At the moment, the company has not made any announcement. Source: RPP News. Pandemic causes closure of at least 750 companies in Bolivia. Venezuela. The economy has led to the closure of 500,000 companies in the last 2 decades. The situation in the country has worsened the business fabric in recent years. The economic crisis in Venezuela has not left anyone out of its cruelty. Much less to the business sector that has been affected mainly by the lack of currency availability and the uncertainty in the political scenario. These reasons caused that, between 1998 and 2017, more than 500,000 companies have disappeared, according to information from Consecomercio. By 1998, Venezuela had 800,000 companies operating in the country, but after 19 years in which Chavismo has been in power, only 230,000 companies are still operating. The 3 well-known companies that will not be seen in Colombia by 2023. The companies that will leave the Colombian market have already notified the workers about the end of their contract. Economic and/or political difficulties may be the reasons for your withdrawal. Justo and Bueno. The company with the greatest relevance in the media, Justo and Bueno, stopped opening its doors a few months ago, despite several rescue attempts. According to the superintendents of companies, its continuity in Colombia is not viable, due to the millionaire debts accumulated by it. In May of this same year, the framework of the process in Supersociedades was known. The company had debts for more than 1.7 trillion pesos. In addition, of the creditors, the most affected were the nearly 5,300 employees of the supermarket chain who were laid off as a result of the financial bankruptcy of Justo and Bueno. Shop. The second company to withdraw from the Colombian market is the well-known electronic commerce platform, signifying the withdrawal of an Asian e-commerce giant. Shop is a leading multinational in electronic commerce that announced its withdrawal in most Latin American countries that have left and extreme left governments, such as Argentina, Chile, Peru and Colombia. The company reported at the beginning of September that it will leave the country product of the current uncertainty and in the region of the current political economic panorama. Conheim SAS, the construction company under liquidation. The last company on this list is the construction company Conheim SAS, a company that is currently under judicial liquidation in the country. At this time it remains under the surveillance of the superintendents of companies. As part of this process, the regulator reported in the last few hours that it had disqualified the former legal representative of the construction company for 8 years. This company of Antioquia origin based its operations on the construction and civil engineering, metal mechanic, electrical and telecommunications industries. Nearly 20,000 companies closed in 4 years. Colombian businessmen are producing at half speed. The reason? The market does not give for more. Many of them have even chosen to close their industries or change their activity. The content of this audio does nothing more than bring the economic reality that is being experienced. There is no doubt that mass layoffs will continue to affect the entire world economic market. You can protect yourself now. It takes many years to rebuild the economic market, and the only possibility that the people have is to create their own money independently of the countries. Copega Club gives you that possibility since it brings you money from residual payments of 100% commissions. A global network totally independent from any government entity or financial entity. You decide what to do with your money coming to you day by day, weekly or monthly. To do this, you only have to sell 4 Copega packages to those who want to do the same and start an independent life, without having invested a cent of your current money.